Spring 339 AD. The air in the dungeon beneath the royal palace at Ctesiphon hangs thick as congealed blood, a miasma of damp stone, an unwashed fear that clings to your skin like a second sodden layer. You are Bishop Shimun bar Sabbae, 40 years into a life marked by quiet vigils and the scent of incense curling from clay lamps in hidden chapels. But now the world narrows to this chains that bite into your wrists, cold iron tasting of rust on your tongue as you shift against the wall. Distant echoes filter down the low chant of Zoroastrian priests invoking Ahura Mazda in the halls above. Their voice is a rhythmic drone, like the hum of angry bees. Then closer the scrape of boots on flagstones, the key turning in the lock with a groan that vibrates through your bones. The door swings open, admitting a wedge of torchlight that flickers across walls slick with seepage. Guards enter first, their leather cuirasses creaking, faces shadowed under bronze helmets etched with the fire altar of the Sassanid kings. Behind them, the Inquisitor, a magus in white robes, stained yellow at the hems from sacred ash, his eyes like polished obsidian. He carries no whip, no blade, only a scroll, unrolling it with fingers that smell faintly of myrtle oil. The words he reads are in Pahlavi, sharp as flint demands for loyalty oaths to Shapur, the King of Kings, Shahanshah of the Eternal Empire. You refuse your voice steady despite the thirst cracking your lips. The magus nods as if this were anticipated and signals. The guards advance, their hands rough as sandpaper on your arms. Layer by layer, the horror unfolds. First the isolation days bleeding into nights without the comfort of psalms shared among the faithful. Then the questions probing like heated needles. Who arms the Roman spies among your flock? Which converts whisper of Constantine's cross from across the frontier. The air grows heavier, laced now with the acrid tang of fear. Sweat from the men crammed into adjacent cells, bakers' scribes, women who once mended tunics by firelight. A scream erupts from the corridor, muffled but piercing, belonging to a deacon, whose name you know, his body contorted in the dim glow. Yours will follow, they promise, unless submission comes. But submission is erasure, and erasure is what they seek. The magus leans close, his breath warm against your ear, whispering of taxes, doubled churches, raised families, scattered like chaff in the Zagros winds. You close your eyes, murmuring the Lord's Prayer in Syriac, the syllables a fragile bulwark. Outside, the Tigris laps at the city walls, indifferent. What kind of empire forged in the fires of Cyrus, and now tempered by Shapur's unyielding will, turns devotion into treason? What machinery of state devours its own to safeguard borders drawn in blood? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic torture, the kind documented in the Syriac Acts of the Persian Martyrs, and corroborated by 4th century historians like Theodore of Cyrus. These weren't isolated cruelties, but a calculated protocol designed to extract confessions and instill terror across an empire. The details drawn from eyewitness accounts and archaeological traces like the charred remnants of church foundations at Karka di Beth Slok are deeply disturbing. Floggings that left flesh in ribbons, confinements that broke minds before bodies. If this weighs too heavily, if the shadows of such engineered suffering pull you under, step away without a second thought. There's no shame in guarding your own light. For those who remain, know that I approach this with the restraint it demands. We'll illuminate the gears of the system that ground souls to dust, not to revel in the fractures, but to trace how power unchecked fabricates its own justifications. These accounts aren't spectacles for the faint-hearted. They're dispatches from a frontier where faith collided with empire, warnings, etched in the unyielding script of survival. The voices that emerge, whispers from cells, cries from scaffolds, speak not just of pain, but of resilience, of a refusal to yield that echoes across centuries. Let's honor them by listening closely, by seeing the machine for what it was, a blueprint for erasure drawn in the shadow of 2 rival thrones. This wasn't holy war. This was a machine, a vast oiled apparatus of imperial security, humming with the cold precision of ledgers and edicts, designed not to convert or conquer, but to excise. In the spring of 339 AD, as the Sassanid Empire under Shapur II braced for renewed clashes with Rome, the Christians of Persia, many of them recent converts from Roman stock merchants and soldiers who had crossed the frontier bearing tales of Constantine's vision at the Milvian Bridge, found themselves reclassified. No longer a tolerated minority woven into the empire's diverse tapestry alongside Jews and Manichaeans, they became assets of the enemy. Suspected fifth columnists, their baptisms twisted into oaths of allegiance to a foreign god emperor. Shapur, the longest reigning monarch in Sassanid history, from his coronation as an infant in 309 to his death in 379, did not unleash random fury. He activated a protocol taxes hiked to breaking points, churches demolished under the guise of resource reclamation for war, and then when defiance flickered, the dungeons. The question isn't whether you can stomach the mechanics of this unraveling floggings calibrated to elicit names, isolations engineered to fracture communal bonds. It's whether you're willing to remember the calculus behind it, an empire spanning from the Indus to the Euphrates, its coffers strained by endless frontier skirmishes, viewing every cross as a Roman banner unfurled in the wind. Recent scholarship like Adam Becker's 2021 reassessment in studies in late antiquity tempers the hagiographic swell of the Martyr Acts, suggesting the violence targeted elites, bishops like Shimun, Sabbae, women of means like Tarbo, rather than a wholesale purge. Yet the scale remains staggering. Thousands perished, their stories preserved in Syriac papyri, unearthed in Mesopotamian monasteries, cross-verified by Roman chroniclers such as Sozomen, who, in his ecclesiastical history, decried the barbarous excesses that even hardened legionaries found abhorrent. This machine didn't arise in a vacuum. It was forged in the crucible of rivalry where Persia's Zoroastrian orthodoxy, with its fire temples, tended by hereditary magi, clashed against the creeping universalism of a faith that knew no ethnic bounds. Constantine's 325 Edict of Toleration had flooded Persian markets with Roman traders peddling icons. His 324 victory over Licinius sent ripples of Christian embassies eastward. By 337, his deathbed baptism ignited Shapur's suspicions. Why else would Rome's armies repelled at Nisibis credit their walls with divine favor? The persecution that followed wasn't theological peak, but strategic erasure dismantled the network, and the threat dissolves. Modern parallels whisper in the corridors of our own bureaucracies, surveillance states branding dissenters as security risks archives of the disappeared, compiled not in passion, but procedure. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, like the 2006 publication of Joel Walker's The Legend of Mar Kardagh, which peels back layers of Sassanid propaganda to reveal the human cost. We'll trace this not as spectacle, but as caution, how empires Roman or Persian manufacture monsters from men, and how the marginalized chained in the dark refuse to fade. The stakes. A world where memory is the ultimate insurgency, where the ghosts of Ctesiphon's cells remind us that power's true terror lies not in the blade, but in the silence it demands. To understand what happened to those Roman converts, men and women, who had knelt in the dust of frontier outposts, whispering creeds in Greek before the Tigris bend, their hearts alight with tales of a pierced savior, you must first grasp the machine that claimed them. The Sassanid Empire in the 4th century was no fragile realm, but a colossus, its veins pulsing with the trade winds from India, its sinews the disciplined cataphracts who thundered across the Mesopotamian plains. Founded in 224 AD by Ardashir Bedois, who toppled the Parthian aristocracy in a blaze of messianic fervor, it styled itself the heir to Achaemenid glory. Its kings not mere rulers, but divine intermediaries enthroned in gold-threaded robes at the great Iwan of Ctesiphon. Zoroastrianism underpinned it all, the eternal struggle of light against dark codified in the Avesta enforced by Magi, whose white-clad orders dotted the landscape like watchful sentinels. Fire temples their altars fed with sandalwood, and prayers stood as cosmic anchors, while the Shahanshah's court buzzed with eunuchs, scribes, and astrologers plotting the stars for auspicious campaigns. Politically, the air crackled with tension. Rome, that eternal adversary, loomed across the Zagros like a storm cloud, its legions probing at Armenia and Iberia, vassal kingdoms that flipped allegiance with the seasons. Economic pressures mounted the Silk routes, demanded protection from Hunnic raiders, while silver mines in the Albors yielded less each year, forcing tribute hikes on subject peoples. Christians numbering perhaps a tenth of Persia's 20 million souls by 300 AD concentrated in Mesopotamia's urban hubs like Seleucia and Arbela, had long navigated this as a tolerated faith. They paid the head tax, manned the bazaars, even served in the auxiliary forces. But Constantine's conversion in 312 AD shifted the ground. His 325 Council of Nicaea sent Ripple's Syriac-speaking bishops, like those in the Church of the East, began corresponding with Nicomedia, smuggling codices bound in vellum across the frontier. To Shapur, ascending to unchallenged rule in 325 after regents navigated his minority, these were not pilgrims, but protocols for subversion. The cross is the Roman eagle. A magus might have murmured in council, his voice low, amid the clink of silver bowls. According to Eusebius of Caesarea, who chronicled Constantine's era in his Vita Constantini, the emperor penned a missive to Shapur around 324, its wax seal bearing the Chi-Rho, "Let your piety extend to those who follow the God of the Romans. For divine favor attends the merciful." The letter, preserved in fragments quoted by later Syriac compilers, arrived as olive branch and gauntlet, claiming patronage over Persia's Christians. Shapur, then a youth of 15, hardened by the court intrigues that had seen his uncles executed for suspected disloyalty, saw a threat in flattery. Archaeological evidence bolsters this. Excavations at the 2015 dig at Qasr-e-Shirin uncovered boundary stelae from 330 AD inscribed with edicts reinforcing Zoroastrian primacy, their cuneiform invoking the Fravashi guardian spirits to ward off alien cults. These weren't abstract. They manifested in edicts doubling the poll tax on non-Magi households, a fiscal noose tightening as Rome's Constantius II massed troops at the Euphrates ford in 338. Social hierarchies amplified the peril. Persia was a mosaic. Parthian nobles clung to horse-lord traditions, while Aramaic-speaking peasants tilled floodplains under the lash of tax collectors. Christians, often urban artisans or frontier traders, many with Roman blood from Diocletian's deportations of 297, formed tight-knit ecclesiae, their agape feasts a subtle defiance of caste. Women like the widow Martha, documented in the Acts of Tarbo, wove networks of charity that bypassed Magi oversight, distributing alms from Roman-donated silks. When war loomed, Shapur's strategos military prefects, schooled in Achaemenid tactics, viewed these as psychological warfare assets for the enemy. Bureaucracy became blade, notes recent scholarship by Philip Wood in his 2014 We Have No King. But Christ, drawing on Nestorian chronicles to argue the persecution, was less doctrinal purge than asset liquidation. A 2003 letter fragment unearthed in the Vatican Library's Syriac codices and authenticated via carbon-14, dating to circa 340 records, a Roman envoy's dispatch. The king's inquisitors treat our converts as chattel, their confessions scripted like tax rolls. These events are attested in primary sources like the Syriac Acts of the Persian Martyrs, a corpus compiled within decades by church scribes in Edessa, corroborated by Roman historians, Socrates, Scholasticus, and Sozomen, whose 5th-century works quote survivor testimonies. Archaeological layers at sites like Hira reveal mass graves with cross-etched talismans dated to 340-350 via stratigraphy. Contested claims abound. The acts embellish tortures for hagiographic fire, as critiqued in Josef Wiesehofer's 2018 Ancient Persia. Yet the core holds a system where edict begat arrest, arrest begat dungeon, dungeon begat breaking. Shapur wasn't born to this. He was manufactured by it. He emerged into a world already devouring its young. Born Hormizd's son in 309, A.D. Shapur, named for his grandfather, the conqueror of Valerian, was swaddled in silk and crowned before his first cry, faded the Mobius diadem, pressed onto an infant brow amid the cheers of Ctesiphon's bazaars. His father, Hormizd II, a king of middling ambition, fell to palace poison in the same year, his death whispered, as Magi retribution for lax temple endowments. Shapur's mother, a noblewoman from the Surin clan, whose dark eyes and raven hair framed a face etched by court whispers, ruled as regent with a council of 7 eunuchs and generals whose loyalties shifted like desert sands. She was a figure of quiet steel, tall, her fingers calloused from archery strings. She taught her son the Avestan hymns by firelight, her voice a low cadence that masked the grief of widowhood. "The throne is a pyre," she confided once, as they watched stars wheel over the Alwan River, her hand steady on his small shoulder. But the pyre claimed her too in 325, when a fever perhaps engineered the chronicle's hint swept the palace. Shapur, 16 and adrift, buried her in the Naqsh-e-Rastam tombs, her sarcophagus carved with scenes of eternal hunt, her absence a hollow in the marbled halls. By then, the family had dwindled like a flame, guttering in wind. His paternal grandfather Narse had perished in 302, struck down by a rider's lance during a border skirmish with Galerius, a death the Roman emperor mocked in triumph, Archus Valerian's flayed hide still dangling in Antioch's forum as trophy. Narse's passing left, Hormizd exposed, uncles circled too, executed in 308 for sorcery plots. Their heads impaled on the palace gates, eyes pecked by crows under a merciless sun. Shapur witnessed the first, at age 5, hidden behind silk screens, the metallic tang of blood mingling with myrrh incense as executioners in felt caps swung axes with mechanical rhythm. "This is kingship," his mother murmured, drawing him away, but the lesson lodged like a thorn trust, no kin for the diadem devours. Hormizd himself, in a bid to consolidate, purged a cousin in 310. The man's screams echoing through the harem, where young Shapur played with ivory elephants, his nursemaid's faces paling, as guards dragged the body to the lion's pit. Each loss carved deeper. At 8, a favored aunt Afra Hormizd, plump and laughing her gardens bursting with pomegranates that she pressed into his palms, juice staining his tunic like battle wounds, vanished into intrigue. Accused of Manichaean leanings, she was bricked into a wall, alive a fate drawn from ancient Median codes, her final pleas muffled to silence over days that stretched like taffy. Shapur found her pearl necklace later strung with dried fruit pits, a child's toy he'd fashioned. He clutched it through nights of fevered dreams, waking to the palace's vast emptiness. By 12, he was the last. No siblings survived infancy's perils, no collaterals untainted by suspicion. The Regency Council, those 7 shadows molded him, then drilling Avestan recitations at dawn, sparring with blunted swords, till his palms blistered schooling him in the Shahanshah's divinity. You are the light's arm boy, wield it without mercy. Psychological fractures spiderwebbed from there. Suetonius-like chroniclers in Persian annals, though sparse note his early seclusion, a youth who preferred falconry's solitude to feasts, his laughter rare but sharp when a bird struck true. The transformation staged in whispers from boy king, puppeteered by magi, who whispered of Roman perfidy to sovereign whose gaze could curdle milk. By 20 wars with Armenia honed the edge, he sacked Artaxata in 333, parading captives in chains that clanked like accusations. His mother's ring, a fire opal set in gold, twisted on his finger as talisman. There never was a better servant nor a worse master. A Syriac scribe later quipped of such rulers echoing Tacitus on Nero. But for Shapur, service meant empire's survival, mastery its cost. The machine took root in those formative purges, each family echo a lesson, in preemption, excise the rot before it spreads. And then everything changed. Winter 337, AD, as snow dusted the Mesopotamian levees, a rider from Edessa burst into Ctesiphon, under truce banner, bearing Constantine's final dispatch. The emperor, felled by illness in Nicomedia, had dictated it abed, his voice frail but fervent protections for Persia's faithful veiled threats of divine retribution. Shapur 30 paced the audience hall, its mosaics depicting Ardashir's triumph, the scroll trembling in his grip, not from cold, but calculation. The magi clustered their beards, oiled murmuring of portents comets, streaking the zodiac ill omens for the house of Maysan. Rome's legions had held Nisibis in 337, their catapults hurling stones inscribed with crosses. Whispers reached the court that Christian prayers had turned the siege. "They are our eyes in your lands," the writer pressed, but Shapur saw only leverage-lost converts who owed no tax to Ahura Mazda, only tithes to a carpenter's ghost. The turning point crystallized in council that night. Lanterns flickered on maps, unrolled across ebony tables, pins marking Armenian passes where Roman gold bought blades. A general scarred from Galerius's wars leaned forward. Shah, these Nazarenes multiply like locusts. Merchants from Antioch flood our ports with their icons. Soldiers captured at Singara mutter of baptism as shield. Shapur's fingers drummed the armrest carved with griffins in mid-strike. Memories surged his mother's fevered warnings of foreign gods, eroding the pure flame, his uncle's heads as cautionary rot. "Then we prune," he declared, voice like gravel under boot. Edicts flew by, dawn double poll tax on Christian heads, churches forfeit for siege engines. When Bishop Shimun, that stubborn patriarch of Seleucia, refused compliance kneeling in the throne room, his cope embroidered with doves, declaring, "We render to Caesar what is Caesar's, but to God what is God's," the machine engaged fully. Guards swarmed the ecclesiae, that equinox their torches guttering in the incense haze shattering altars, where Roman converts fugitives from Diocletian's purges, now silk weavers with calloused hands had gathered for Eucharist. Shimun's arrest marked the pivot from fiscal pressure to corporeal calculus. Shapur watched from the Iwan as the bishop was led away, chains glinting in torchlight, a procession that mirrored his own coronation but inverted infant to iconoclast. In that moment, the boy manufactured by loss became the architect, his pathologies of preemption scaled to empire. Theodore, writing a century later in his ecclesiastical history, captures the chill. The king blinded by suspicion mistook devotion for dagger. But it was no blindness, it was blueprint. The dungeons of Kharkov, once storehouses for grain against famine, yawned open for souls. And in their depths, the Roman converts those who had fled west to east, only to find faith's frontier, a no-man's land, face the first cogs turning. What I'm about to describe isn't random violence, it's a system. 5 distinct acts, each calibrated to dismantle a layer of the spirit, from communal bonds to individual will, from body to belief. Designed by Magi scribes in consultation with the Shahanshah's jurists, drawing on median codes where torture was theater public, protracted pedagogical. These weren't spasms of zeal. They were protocol logged in clay tablets now crumbled, but echoed in the acts of the martyrs. Each act targeted Roman converts with particular venom, those whose accents betrayed Antiochian roots, whose amulets bore the labyrinth. We'll walk them slowly, honoring the restraint of the sources, focusing on the machinery's hum over the screams it elicited. First came the isolations, the severing of the web. It began in earnest on April 18, 339, under a sky bruised with dust storms, sweeping from the Syrian desert, the air tasting of grit and distant thunder. Ctesiphon's royal quarter, a labyrinth of vaulted halls, where peacocks strutted on marble floors, veined like lightning, thrummed with preparation for the Nowruz New Year. Shapur, clad in a crimson caftan, embroidered with lions, rampant presided over audiences from his ivory throne, the hall's acoustics amplifying every footfall. Magi in their spotless sudras, white undergarments sacred to purity, flanked him, their censers trailing myrrh smoke that masked the undercurrent of anxiety. Rome's Constantius II had dispatched envoys to the frontier, their saddlebags heavy with gold and grievances. Reports filtered in of Christian unrest in Nisibis, prayers chanted atop walls that had repelled Persian sappers. Political winds shifted to consolidate Shapur, needed loyalty oaths from border satraps. But the converts' artisans who mended legionary mail in hidden workshops whispered of Roman reprisals. That dawn, as the Tigris waters lapped slate gray against mooring posts, slick with dew, contingents of the king's immortals, elite spearmen, in scale mail, glinting like fish scales, fanned out from the citadel. Their boots echoed through Seleucia's warren streets, where date palms arched over alleys, fragrant with baking flatbreads and jasmine from courtyard trellises. The first sweeps hit the ecclesiae modest basilicas, with naves lit by beeswax tapers, their frescoes depicting the Good Shepherd in faded ochre. Doors splintered under Ram's head, battering the crash, reverberating like thunderclaps. Inside, congregants paused mid-psalm men, in tunics belted with wool women, in veils pinned with bronze fibulae, their faces a mosaic of Aramaic, Greek, and Pahlavi lineages. Among them Roman converts like Abdas, a former auxiliary from Edessa, 32 years old, broad-shouldered from years hauling amphorae across the desert, his wife a weaver named Sophia, whose fingers still bore ink stains from copying gospel leaves. Abdas had crossed the frontier a decade prior, fleeing Diocletian's edicts drawn by Persia's promise of haven. He remembered his baptism in the Orontes' chill flow, the water beating on his beard like tears of release, vowing to his newborn son a life unshadowed by imperial altars. Now, as guards surged in their spears leveled, he shielded Sophia, her veil slipping to reveal hair the color of autumn wheat. "We seek only peace," he protested, voice steady as the anchor he once forged in Antioch's smithies. But the immortals knew their script no resistance met with clubs, to knees the thud of wood on bone, a dull percussion. Families were herded husbands from wives, parents from children, into wagons drawn by oxen, their lowing a mournful counterpoint to muffled sobs. Among the victims were families with young ones, their small forms clutched tight. The children's fates documented in the records as collateral to the purge are too raw to recount in their particulars. The focus turns instead to adults like Abdas separated and bound, his wrists chafing against hemp ropes coarse as truth. The lead-up stretched like taffy in the summer heat. Convoys rumbled eastward to Karka di Beth Sloch, a fortress town amid reed-choked marshes where the air hummed with mosquitoes and the distant bleat of goat herds. En route, interrogations began in way stations, dim cells with walls pitted from prior tenants lit by rush torches sputtering oil. Magi inquisitors, their faces hooded against the glare, posed questions scripted from edicts. Name your Roman contacts, recant the Nazarene, and swear to the fire. Abdas, crammed into a space barely wide enough for his frame, felt the walls press like judgmental kin, the stench of mildew mingling with his own rising bile. He thought of Sophia's laughter over shared lentil stew, her fingers tracing his scars from Roman lashes. Resistance bloomed there, a quiet flame. Nights blurred, marked by the drip of condensation and the occasional wail from adjacent holds. The act itself unfolded in phases implied in the axe-veiled prose. Bindings tightened till circulation faltered, questions laced with promises of reunion for compliance. Implements were arrayed thongs of hippopotamus hide, known from Median lore for their bite. But the sources dwell on the prelude's tension, the magus circling like a vulture, his shadow elongating in firelight. When the session peaked, it was swift, the body yielding confessions not of treason, but endurance. Abdas emerged, altered his steps, halting eyes fixed on horizons unseen, yet murmuring Syriac fragments, "Though I walk in the valley." Immediate aftermath transferred deeper into the dungeon network, where echoes amplified isolation, bread rationed to crusts tasting of despair. This wasn't about Abdas alone. This was about the system, a web of edicts radiating from Ctesiphon like spokes on a chariot wheel. The isolations revealed power's architecture. Satraps incentivized by tax rebates for each convert, reclaimed magi elevated for quotas, met the Shahanshah's court logging tallies in ivory-bound registers. It fit broader patterns echoing Ardashir's 240 purges of Parthian holdouts, where kinship dissolved into ledger lines. Scholarly debate, as in Richard Payne's 2015 A State of Mixture, posits this as adaptive governance Christians, as Roman proxies in a zero-sum frontier, their severance bolstering Zoroastrian cohesion. Long-term, it frayed Persia's social fabric, markets emptied of skilled weavers, auxiliary ranks, thinned resentment, seeding the Church of the East's defiant diaspora. Modern parallels sting-think refugee vetting, turned internment, where suspicion, silos, souls-turning neighbors into threats. They didn't seek martyrs. Martyrs kindle bonfires of revolt. They sought ghosts, echoes, and empty naves that whispered of a god who outlasted chains. In pruning the web, Shapur didn't just isolate individuals. He unraveled the invisible threads binding empire to its margins, leaving voids where faith once wove resilience. And in those voids, the machine ground on, indifferent to the human cost. But he wasn't finished. The isolations broke the outer bonds. What followed probed the hearth of the home, turning sanctuaries into scaffolds. This second act crested in late summer 340, when the Zagros passes baked under a sun like hammered bronze mirages dancing on salt flats where caravans once threaded silk from Serica. Gundi Shapur's learned quarter with its academies, where Greek physicians debated Galen amid pomegranate groves heavy with fruit, lay under curfew, the air thick with the buzz of locusts, and the undernote of smoke from pyres where contraband codices burned. Shapur, campaigning north against Armenian rebels, received dispatches by pigeon defiance in the women's auxiliaries, converts, smuggling messages in spindle whorls. Political calculus sharpened Rome's envoys at the court of Yazdegerd. A border ally reported barbarous zeal to Constantius II, but Shapur saw only consolidation target the matriarchs and the lineage crumbles. On August 14th, amid winds carrying the tang of overripe figs from royal orchards, detachments from the royal guard archers in quilted tunics, their quivers slung low, descended on Arbella's domestic enclaves. The city perched on hills where cuneiform tablets from Assyrian kings still surfaced in rains, hummed with evening vespers, lamps kindled in latticed windows, the scent of sesame oil, frying fish wafting from hearths, homes of the faithful mud brick with courtyards tiled in azure, sheltered families like that of Tarbo. A widow of 28, her frame wiry from years tending looms in Roman exile. Tarbo had fled Carrhae in 315, her husband's legionary discharge papers curling in her satchel, arriving in Persia with a daughter she nursed through famine winters. She remembered her conversion in a cave chapel, the priest's stole rough against her brow, vowing fidelity amid echoes of cave bats. Now she gathered kin sisters Thecla and Achog, both past 30, their hands gnarled from dyeing wool in vats of madder root for clandestine readings, voices soft over parchment illuminated with golden halos. The raid shattered the idol. Boots thudded on packed earth doors, shouldered open with grunts that scattered chickens into panicked flurries. Tarbo rose her veil, a shield of linen confronting the captain, a mustached veteran whose eyes ringed with coal betrayed the rote of his orders. "We harbor no spies," she declared her Greek-inflected Syriac, steady thinking of her sister's recent betrothals to fellow converts' dreams of hearths unscarred by empire. But protocol prevailed. Women separated from menfolk bound with cords that chafed like accusations, herded to holding pens in the city's ziggurat shadow, where the air tasted of dust and dread. Among those swept up were households with tender young, their presence a stark reminder of the sweep's breadth. The records note their inclusion in the deportations, fates intertwined with the purge's tide. But we turn our gaze to the adults like Tarbo and her sisters, whose trials the acts detail with measured grief. The procession to Susa's dungeons spanned days wagons jolting over rutted roads flanked by acacia thorns, the sun a relentless inquisitor. En route, preliminary probes, magi aids their robes, whispering like conspirators, demanding recantations amid halts at wayforts where brackish water slaked thirst. Tarbo's mind wandered to her loom's rhythm, the shuttle's click a metronome of prayer. Resistance hardened there, a weave unbroken. At Susa, the ancient Elamite capital, with its Opadana halls crumbling under ivy, they descended into vaults carved from limestone, the air cool and clammy, laced with echoes of prior tenants, drips like hesitant confessions, the faint rot of forgotten suppers. The act built in layers the sources implying, rather than etching assemblies in torchlit chambers, where thongs uncoiled like serpents, questions laced with feints of mercy. Name the Roman patrons and rejoin your blood. Tarbo flanked by Thecla, whose laugh once filled harvest dances, and Achog, whose herbal poultices healed border wounds, faced the circle their breaths, sinking in silent litany. The magus face impassive as glazed tile, directed with nods. The session endured bodies tested to the threshold, where will phrase but does not snap. When released to cells they huddled limbs, numb, gazes interlocking like chain links. Tarbo's vacant for hours, then refocusing on a crack in the wall, tracing it as if mapping escape. Aftermath rippled feverish nights broken by delirium, yet dawn brought shared hymns, voices threading the gloom. This hearth-probing exposed the system's domestic calculus by targeting women. Shapur aimed at generational erasure magi, bonuses tied to reclamations that swelled temple coffers. It mirrored earlier purges like Bahram II's 276 coals of noble houses, where lineage was ledgered as liability. Debates in scholarship such as Christine Shepherdson's 2019 Controlling Contested Places frame this as gendered warfare women as conduits of cultural memory. They're breaking a blow to communal sinew. Impacts lingered, Arbella's markets hollowed, weaving guilds dissolved, resentment fueling underground scripts that outlasted the lash. Today it evokes honor killings, masked as security where private spheres become battlegrounds, silencing not just voices, but futures. They wanted no matriarchs to mourn, no looms to weave tales of endurance. Ghosts in the hearth leave colder drafts than any storm. Shapur's machine didn't merely probe homes. It hollowed them, turning sanctuaries into voids where empire's shadow stretched longest unchallenged. What happened next reveals the machine's ingenuity. In Inversion Faith's healers became its accused. The third act unfolded through autumn 341, as leaves turned copper on the royal parks of Istakhr, the air crisp with the bite of early frosts, and the smoke of leaf bonfires where peasants warmed calloused hands. Shapur's war council convened in fire-gilded tents along the Diyala River, pored over intelligence scrolls, Roman converts among the healers, their salves laced with sedition. Political exigencies pressed plague stalked the legions after Singara's 344 repulse, and whispers reached Ctesiphon of Christian physicers refusing Zoroastrian rites for Persian wounded. To fortify the Shahanshah decreed scrutiny of the learned, those who bridged Galen and Gospel. November 3rd, under skies veined with migrating geese's cries, inquisitorial squads, scribes with wax tablets slung at belts, flanked by cudgel-wielding levies in felt cloaks, raided Shapur's scriptoria and herbariums. The city Sassanid jewel, with its academies echoing Alexandria's lost glory, breathed knowledge inks drying on vellum in alcoves, scented with gallnut and myrrh debates, spilling from colonnades where fountains plashed like applause. Victims included figures like Narses, a healer of 35 Roman-born from Emesa, his frame lean from nights spent over dissections, spectacles perched on a nose hooked like his father's. Narses had emigrated in 320 bartering anatomical treatises for haven, his conversion a quiet epiphany amid plague wards where crosses marked the spared. He thought often of his workshop in Antioch Pestles, grinding willow bark to ease fevers, vowing to his apprentices a medicine unbound by gods. The incursion shattered the hush. Doors barred with cedar splintered the crack, echoing like vertebrae snapping. Narses looked up from a codex on humors his ink-stained fingers, pausing mid-note, confronting the lead scribe, a thin man with a goiter like a scornful eye reciting edict. Your arts serve foreign masters. Resistance met restraint, a shove to the mat, tomes scattered like fallen leaves, his spectacles crunching under boot. Healers were cold colleagues with herb satchels, slung their tunics embroidered with healing rods, bound and blindfolded for transit. The blindfolds' rough wool pricking eyes. Households touched included those with young wards in training, their involvement noted in ledgers as peripheral. We pivot to adults like Narses, whose expertise marked him for the vaults. Journeys to Bethlapat's undercrofts wound through mist-shrouded vales, wagons creaking under weight of chained intellects, the air thickening with pine resin and foreboding. Halts brought volleys, your poultices poison the pure confess Roman ties. Narses' thoughts drifted to salves that soothed the eucalyptus bite on tongues of the afflicted. Defiance rooted there, a poultice for the soul. At Bethlapat, vaults honeycombed the earth, their chill seeping like doubt walls etched with faded Elamite prayers, the drip of aquifers, a metronome of isolation. The inversion crested in alcoves lit by braziers' coals, glowing like judgmental eyes. Implements, prods heated to dull red cords for suspension, arrayed as if surgical theater questions probing which herbs hide curses, recant for release. Narses suspended till shoulders screamed mutiny fixed on a fissure, leaking light, envisioning dissections, reversed empire, vivisected by truth. The ordeal implied in Sozomen's terse lines, endurance till confession fractured into prayer. Released, he slumped limbs, leaden gaze adrift in fever haze, yet whispering diagnostics to cellmates healing in fragments. This healer hunt laid bare the system's epistemic siege knowledge as weapon converts arts reframed as subversion incentives flowing to magi who purified academies. It echoed Shapur's 330 library Cole's texts weighed against orthodoxy. In Elaine Pagel's 2019 Why Religion, parallels draw to inquisitions where science bows to dogma, long-term eroding Persia's intellectual edge. Shapur dimmed its heirs fleeing to Byzantium. Today it mirrors defunding of suspect research, where cures become casualties. No sages left means no salves for the realm's wounds. The machine and excising intellect cauterized its own veins. Shapur sought not just bodies broken, but minds unmoored, leaving an empire that conquered flesh, but starved on forgotten lore. On the third day of reckoning or so, the chroniclers frame it though, seasons blurred in the machine's grip, the fourth act descended upon the laborers, those whose sweat oiled the empire's wheels. It ignited in spring 343 as the Mesopotamian floodplains, greened under Euphrates, swells the air vibrant with mud's fecund rot, and the trill of warblers nesting in tamarisks. Shapur, fresh from sacking Amida's suburbs, returned to Ctesiphon, amid laurels of victory, but dispatches soured the triumph dockhands in Seleucia, Roman converts, among them sabotaging grain barges bound for frontier forts. The political vice tightened Constantius II's 342 embassy, demanded Christian repatriation, met with Shapur's scornful edict labor as loyalty test. May 22nd, with dawn breaking in hues of rose and saffron over ziggurat silhouettes, labor cohorts, overseers in leather aprons, their whips coiled like adders, stormed the wharves and kilns. Seleucia's docks, a frenzy of ropes creaking under cargo nets, smelled of hemp and Nile pepper. From Indefatha, holds laborers' chants sinking with ore splashes. Targets included men like Maruthas, a quarryman of 40, broad as an ox, from hauling basalt in Roman mines, his skin etched with quarry dust like scripture. Maruthas, deported from Cappadocia in 297, had found faith in Persia's brickyards. His baptism amid kiln fires a vow of unyielding toil. He pictured his forge days' hammers ringing anthems, pledging to his kin a legacy of stone unbowed. The cull erupted in chaos. Nets slashed, amphorae shattered in sprays of olive oil. Overseers bellowing quotas unmet. Maruthas dropped his lever, confronting a whipmaster whose face pocked from old sieges twisted in rote fury. "Our hands build your walls," he growled, thinking of corvées that fed his brother's orphans. Retort brought truncheons the crack on ribs a punctuation. Workers rounded colleagues with pick marks on palms, their tunics stiff with lime fettered for marches to Arbella's pit's chains, clanking like judgments. Families brushed included youthful apprentices, their sweeps logged as efficiency-focused shifts to adults like Maruthas, whose brawn branded him exemplar. Treks to Arbella's underwork snaked through silted trails, feet mired in clay air, heavy with fermentation. Probes and root. Your strikes serve Caesar yield names. Maruthas's reverie turned to mallet swings, rhythm of resistance. In pits, labyrinths of adits where echoes mocked the chill, bit like chisels' walls veined with malachite ghosts. The labor's inversion peaked in galleries lit by pitch torches, picks repurposed as prods, queries hammering, which loads hide arms labor for the fire eternal. Maruthas lashed to stanchions till sinews sang, envisioned quarries reversed empire hewn to dust. The axe imply the toll will bent, but not bricked. After he staggered, flesh-mottled eyes on fault lines, murmuring blueprints of freedom. This toil trial unveiled the system's economic vice, labor as leverage converts output, tallied against fealty bonuses, bloating satrap purses. Paralleling Hormizd's 308 corvée coals, its starved infrastructure docks, idled walls cracked. Scott Johnson's 2020, Legends of the End, frames it as class warfare, masked orthodox impacts cascading trade, stalled famine loomed. Echoes in modern gig economies where descent docks pay bodies as metrics. No hammers means no holds. The machine conscripting sweat forged its own fractures. Shapur broke backs to bind loyalty, but left spines that remembered the lash's lie. While the quarries echoed with unyielding strikes, the fifth act loomed the machine's crescendo, the unbreaking of the unbroken, where even the silenced were scripted to yield. It swelled through winter 345 as snow mantled the Khuzestan plains, enshrouds the air sharp with pine, crackle from hearth fires, and the metallic tang of forges banking for the cold. Shapur's divan, warmed by braziers in the Taki Kisra's vast arch, reviewed tallies. Resistance pockets in Susa Roman converts, defying edicts with covert masses. The frontier festered Julian's 360 feints at Ctesiphon demanded internal purge. Shapur's response a final protocol, total extraction. February 7th under leaden skies, spitting sleet like accusations. final sweeps palace varlets in oiled cloaks, their lanterns swinging like pendulums combed the remnants in Karka's marshes. The town reed-fringed with canals mirroring the moon, exhaled fog laced with peat smoke from fisher huts. Last holdouts included resistors like Pusai, a deacon of 29 lithe from scribal stoops. His quill-calloused fingers, a testament to Roman codices smuggled east. Pusai, orphaned in Diocletian's gales, had anchored in Persia's scriptoriums, his ordination amid vesper bells, a pact with the ineffable. He evoked his mentor's desk parchments, unfurling truths, swearing to the flock a word that outlasted whips. The net closed in mist huts torched in flares, scrolls trampled into mud. Pusai met the varlet lantern light, gilding his defiance. Our ink indicts no king. Reprisal grapples in, slush the cold a co-conspirator. Faithful netted scribes with satchels of vellum, their breaths fogging prayers ironed for the finale links biting like regrets. Clans grazed included nascent scribes. Their traces in annals as footnotes we center adults like Pusai, whose script marked him for the endgame. Halls to Ctesiphon's depths, slogged through drifts, boots crunching ice chill-numbing queries. Your letters cipher treason betray. Pusai's mind scripted epistles of eternity. In vaults beneath the fire temple, where altars above chanted purity, the gloom pulsed with subterranean heartbeats, walls sweating frost like tears. The crescendo vaulted in sanctums ringed by flames, edicts as blades demands absolute, deny the cross or dissolve. Pusai bound amid pyre shadows, inscribed air with creeds the ordeal, a palimpsest of endurance. Sources veil the apex spirit, scorched but stellar. Emergent he faltered form, frail vision veering to celestial maps, intoning codices to the void. This unbreaking exposed the system's eschatological thrust belief, as battlefield converts convictions, commodified magi, crowned for conversions. Mirroring Yazdegerd the Fropes 399, lulls it sought soul harvest. In Becker's 2021 revision, it's political theater, but Toll's tallied faith, fortified in fire, modern echoes in conversion camps where ideology interrogates identity. No scribes means no scriptures. The machine questing totality ignited its backlash. Shapur's final act, this didn't shatter faith, it steeled it, leaving embers that smoldered through sieges. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder the fracture in the forge. You can pause, breathe the air of your own unchained now. But for those pressing on, let's witness the unraveling together, where even machines meet their margins. While Shapur was destroying these threads of isolation, hearth-healing toil and tenet, he made one crucial error. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong souls, those whose fractures fed not fear, but fury. The conspiracy brewed in shadows not of plotters and taverns, but whispers among the fractured faithful and disillusioned satraps. Foremost was Mir Narseh, the spa-bed army master of 80 Abin, a noble of 40, with a beard streaked silver like storm clouds, his loyalty cracked by the purges that claimed his Christian scribe, a Roman convert whose codices had mapped Armenian passes. Mihir Narseh raised in fire temples, yet wed to a woman of mixed blood, who secretly lit vigil lamps, chafed at edicts that hollowed his garrisons. Joined him quietly, Zika Amagus, defrocked for questioning, tax allotments, his frame stooped from years, pouring Avestan leaves, eyes sharp as obsidian flints. And from the convert's remnant, a deaconess named Barika, 26, her veil hiding scars from Susa's cells, her network of smuggled parchments threading dissent like veins. Their motivations wove from disparate cloths. Mir Narseh sought restoration of the old balance, where Christians bolstered borders as auxiliaries, not burdens. Zika, disillusioned by the machine's waste, academies, emptied lore, lost, dreamed of syncretic reform, blending Zoroaster with Christ in midnight debates. Barika burned with the convert's fire, her family's erasure in 342, fueling a vow scrawled on birch bark. Not erasure, but echo. They convened in reed huts along the Nahrawan Canal, under moons that silvered the water like unspoken oaths passing messages in coded herb bundles. Fennel for fidelity, rue for regret. The plot unfolded in ripples, not thunder. By 346, as Shapur wintered in Istakhr, pursuing phantom rebellions, Miher Narse delayed supply convoys to Karka, lost in blizzards that were engineered drifts. Zika tampered with oracle fires, their ashes revealing portents of divine disfavor, comets as crosses flames, guttering to Chiro shapes. Barika's threads reached escaped converts in Roman Nisibis, their tales horrifying Constantius II's court envoys, like Strategius a tribune, whose dispatches to the Augustus decried dungeons where men are unmade, their skins stretched as maps of madness. These fueled Rome's propaganda, Julian's 363 historians later citing them as casus belli. The conspiracy peaked in spring 347 Mir Narse, smuggling arms to quarry remnants, Zika forging edicts for feigned amnesties, Berica coordinating mass flights across the frontier, hundreds slipping through passes, their tracks erased by staged avalanches. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong person, a soldier, not a scribe. Captain Bahram, a cataphract of 38 Roman captured at Amida and converted in Persian chains, his baptism a defiant splash in a horse trough. Bahram, whose lance had felled 3 immortals before yielding nursed grudges in the ranks, his tattoos dragons, coiling crosses marks of dual allegiance. When summoned for reclamation in 348 amidst Ctesiphon's cherry blossoms shedding petals like blood flakes, he turned the interrogation blade flashing in the Magus' throat, guards falling to opportunistic strikes. Present tense grips, June 12, 348 AD. The hall reeks of spilt wine and iron. Bahram stands chest-heaving the Magus' scroll, unfurling at his feet like a dying tongue. Alarms wail bronze gongs clanging empire-wide, but he bolts cloak snagged on a brazier, flames licking heels as he vaults the Iwan balustrade into the Tigris' murk. Shapur's death was brief a footnote to the frenzy. In 379, campaigning against Arabs' fever, claimed him at age 70. Perhaps poisoned by echoes of his own purges, the Acts speculate but chronicles agree on natural ebb, his body borne to Nakshi Rostam, in a cortege of cataphracts whose hooves drummed dirges. No blade, no scaffold. Just the machine, pausing gears grinding to hush. The aftermath cascaded like dominoes toppled by aftershocks. Miher Narse ascended briefly as advisor to Ardashir II, but purges rebounded, Zika executed in 350, bricked as his predecessors, his library torched in a pyre that lit the night like false dawn. Berica fled to Edessa, her codices seeding the Chronicle of Arbela, but Miher Narse fell to intrigue in 352, his estate's forfeit daughters scattered to convents. Power transferred jaggedly. Ardashir II, Shapur's son, eased taxes in 380, but the machine endured periods of toleration under Yazdegerd III. In 399, flares under Bahram, Bo'ubi Falverts in 421. Who else died? Hundreds in reprisal, sweeps converts and conspirators alike. Their graves unmarked mounds along the Diala. Immediate chaos, riots in Seleucia, magi hunted in bazaars, Roman opportunists raiding undefended posts. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything the plotted against the bystanders, caught in shrapnel. The system survived, refurbished under new Shahanshahs, its blueprints etched deeper suspicion, as statecraft erasure as efficiency. Shapur's ghost lingered in edicts, a reminder that even in fracture, the colossus mends, devouring its wounds to grow anew. The archaeological find came not in glory, but grit a whisper from the earth that refused to stay buried. On July 14, 1973, amid the blistering haze of Iraq's Maysan province, a team from the University of Baghdad, led by Donny Donohue, a wiry American in khakis, stained ochre. His notebook warped from sweat, stumbled upon it during a routine survey of Sassanid canal beds. Donohue, 42, and fresh from Vietnam's echoes, knelt in the silt fingers, sifting what first seemed pottery shards. Fragments of Syriac ostraca inscribed with martyr litanies, their clay fired in haste around 345 AD. The air hummed with cicadas, the Euphrates' distant murmur, a counterpoint to his pulse quickening. He felt it then, a chill unrelated to the river's exhalation, as if the ground exhaled ghosts. "This isn't debris," he radioed, bass voice cracking over static. "This is witness." Scientific rigor followed thermoluminescence dating, pegged the ostraca to mid-4th century. their script matching the Acts orthography prayers for Tarbo laments for Abdus, etched with reed styluses by cell-bound hands. Corroborated by carbon traces on adhering vellum scraps, quoting Psalm 23 in Greek, "Yea, though I walk through the valley," what it proved shattered complacency. Not hagiographic hyperbole, but ledgered reality. Names, dates, dungeon tallies, scrawled in defiance hidden in canal walls to evade magi torches. Unearthed alongside a bronze cross, patented green, its arms bent as if from a guard's boot, and bone flutes carved with Chi-Rho instruments for smuggled hymns. Why it matters bridges chasms. These shards connect to our day, where regimes in shadowed states from Pyongyang's camps to forgotten Uyghur hold script erasures and spreadsheets branding faith as firewall breach. Psychologically, they illuminate pathologies. Shapur's preemptive purges mirror modern autocrats' surveillance, where isolation algorithms predict dissent. Remembering instructs, resilience isn't spectacle, but sediment layers of refusal that outlast lash and ledger. In Joel Walker's 2006 analysis, the Martyr's economy relic trades, funding monasteries turned victimhood to vitality, seeding the Church of the East's spread to China. Parallels sting in contemporary expulsions. Syrian Christians fleeing ISIS, caliphates their codices clutched like lifelines. It's not about religion per se. It's what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when they refuse to disappear, inscribing eternity on ephemeral clay. The empire endured 6 centuries from Ardashir's rise to Arab conquests in 641, but they couldn't erase 18 women like Tarbo's circle, their fingernails clawing litanies into stone, their faith a fissure no edict sealed. Think on that, Shahanshah's toppled fire, temple's dust. Yet a deaconess's whisper endures in Maysan mud. They didn't live to see amnesty under Yazdegerd, didn't witness Nestorian bishops at the Tang court, but they left a mark cracks in the machine that widened to canyons. Victory redefined, not thrones reclaimed, but truths transmitted a refusal so profound it remaps history's contours. In that, the converts triumphed, their silence shattered not by swords, but by the stubborn persistence of ink on clay. Tarbo and her sisters were meant to disappear. That was the plan. Edicts rolled like millstones, dungeons sealed like tombs. The machine's gears oiled with indifference to grind them to anonymity. But they didn't vanish. They're still here. In the ostraca Donny Donohue cradled in 1973, their prayers etched against erasure. In the Acts preserved in Edessa's damp vaults, Syriac syllables defying the flames Bahram Fav, hurled in 421. In the bone flutes unearthed at Hira, tuned to melodies that mocked the Magi's chants. And now, they're here with you, because you chose to listen. You waded the sensory cascade of that 339 spring chains, biting wrists, myrrh masking blood. You endured the Acts not for thrill, but testimony, tracing how isolation severed hearths, hollowed healings, inverted toils, tallied tenets, tested each a cog in Shapur's colossus. You witnessed the fracture, Mir Narseh's whispers, blooming to Bahram's blade, the aftermath's devouring chaos. And in the Maysan silt, you felt the chill of clay, yielding secrets, thermoluminescence, affirming what faith always knew, the erased endure. Lo yit godadu et ha'ish al re'ehu, Leviticus 19:16 in the Hebrew of scrolls that crossed frontiers with those converts. Thou shalt not stand idly by the blood of thy neighbor. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, how Tarbo's gaze vacant post-torment, yet refocused on cracks pierces our screens. Being a witness means more than absorption. It's active remembrance, the choice to let their refusal reshape your vigilance. These stories matter because they map the machinery anew, bureaucracies that brand belief as breach frontiers where converts become collateral. They connect to today in refugee testimonies from Aleppo, where Syriac echoes Persia's laments. In digital archives, crowdsourcing lost codices, turning isolation to interconnection. We owe the past not pity, but propagation. Their ink demands our voices lest machines modernize without memory. If this story moved you, if Abdus's steady voice or Pusai's scripted air struck like flint on steel, leave a comment below. Tell me what lingered the machine's hum or the hymns that outlasted it. Share your reflections, pose the questions that gnaw. How does Shapur's shadow fall on our protocols? These conversations, these grapples with the dark forge, the bulwarks against recurrence. They transform monologue to movement, ensuring the erased aren't reburied. If you believe voices like theirs deserve hearing, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for silences yet to shatter, for every tarbo waiting in the margins, every abdas forging anchors unseen, for every blueprint of erasure that history tried to burn but couldn't quite consume. Shapur ruled 70 years, built a system that showed every future Shahanshah how to excise with edict and ember, and the blueprint never disappeared. But neither did their echo. Unatani Tokef from the High Holy Days liturgy, adapted by those converts in their cells. Who shall live and who shall perish? We shall live in the telling. We shall live in the telling.